5 minutes ago, the palace walls started shaking, not from an earthquake, but from a secret that refused to stay buried. Inside Buckingham Palace, under ceilings that have watched centuries of scandal rise and fall, King Charles sat frozen, staring at a tablet screen looping a video that threatened to detonate everything he had fought 7 decades to inherit. This wasn't idle gossip. This wasn't tabloid nonsense. This was an accusation so radioactive it could scorch the crown itself. The name Meghan Markle was once again splashed across headlines, but this time it wasn't about royal exits or explosive interviews. This time it was about Prince Andrew. And the suggestion? A secret connection stretching back more than 20 years that let that sink in. The allegation didn't come from a random internet troll. It came from a disgraced former royal reporter, a man once banished from palace corridors for digging too deep into the marriage of Charles and Diana, a man with nothing to lose and a reputation already in ashes. He resurfaced with what he called irrefutable proof, and within hours the digital world ignited. In London, the air inside the palace turned suffocating. A closed-door emergency meeting was convened. Old files were reopened. The year 2001, a year soaked in whispered scandal, was dragged back into the light that meanwhile, 5,000 miles away in Montecito, Meghan stood at a towering window overlooking sun-drenched California hills. Her expression, not panic, not tears, something colder, calculated, controlled, because she knew exactly what this was. The accusation claimed she had crossed paths with Prince Andrew long before she ever met Harry. Lavish parties, private tours of royal properties, quiet meetings arranged away from official records. And then came the photograph. Grainy, yellow-tinted, early 2000s digital blur, a yacht deck blazing under Mediterranean sunlight, a young woman with dark cascading hair standing very close to Andrew, his hand resting at her waist in a way that didn't look like polite distance. The internet didn't ask questions. It decided that facial analysis experts were dragged onto television, cheekbones compared, nose structures dissected. Even the placement of a mole was scrutinized like forensic evidence. Overnight, suspicion mutated into obsession. Inside Montecito, Meghan didn't collapse. She mobilized. Elite law firms in London and New York were called. Cease and desist letters flew like arrows in a medieval siege. The message was clear. Publish at your own risk. But here's the twist no one saw coming, that the more aggressively the image was suppressed, the faster it spread. Critics whispered the question that always poisons a defense: if it's fake, why does this feel like panic? Harry appeared beside her at a charity event days later. He tried to smile, tried to project unity, but his hands fidgeted with his jacket. His eyes scanned reporters like a soldier searching for snipers. Something had shifted, because Andrew isn't just a name, he's a wound that never healed, a scandal that never fully died. And now that same shadow was brushing against Harry's marriage. Back in London, Charles maintained silence. No public defense, no supportive statement. He watched from a distance, not just as a father, but as a monarch calculating risk. He ordered a quiet internal inquiry. That alone sent a chilling message: this wasn't being dismissed. Then, the dramatic twist. Investigative reporters dug through old modeling archives. Days of combing through dusty records led to a revelation. The woman in the yacht photo wasn't Meghan. She was a Canadian model whose resemblance was disturbingly precise. The correction hit front pages. For 48 hours, Montecito exhaled. Vindication. Validation. Victory. Supporters called it a smear campaign, proof of media cruelty. The Sussex camp claimed they had been targeted by a malicious fabrication. But here's where the real tension begins. King Charles didn't look relieved, because to him, the photo had become a distraction. The reporter's original claim wasn't about a yacht snapshot. It was about private dinners, early morning palace tours before gates opened to the public, late night drives in unmarked vehicles. And the timeline aligned too neatly with Meghan's early trips to Europe. The photo was debunked. But the story? Still breathing. Charles met the reporter in a private manner outside London. No cameras, no aides beyond trusted staff, just a king and a man holding what he claimed was memory instead of proof. The reporter admitted something devastating. He had no documents, no contracts, no photographs, only recollection and secondhand accounts. Unprovable. But disturbingly plausible. And that's the most dangerous kind of allegation, because a lie can be crushed. A rumor that feels possible lingers like poison in the bloodstream. Charles left that meeting without relief. He understood something Harry might not. In the age of digital frenzy, doubt is enough to erode foundations. Back in Montecito, Harry received the call. His father's voice carried exhaustion, not accusation, warning. And that's when the real fracture began. Harry started replaying stories Meghan had once told him about her early 20s. Ambitious trips, networking in Europe, career exploration. Details that once sounded sounded inspiring now felt ambiguous. He paced. He spiraled. Papers swept from his desk in frustration. The questions he had never dared to ask began forming in silence. And Meghan? She watched from the hallway. Calm, composed, silent, not defensive, not furious, silent. And sometimes silence roars louder than denial. The world split into two camps. One side saw a woman targeted by relentless media cruelty. The other side saw patterns too coincidental to ignore. Business partners grew cautious. Invitations slowed. The Sussex brand, built on transparency, trembled. Even after the yacht photo was exposed as mistaken identity, the engagement numbers told a cruel truth. The correction never travels as far as the accusation. Harry stopped sleeping. Charles walked alone in Palace Gardens, understanding that in this era, perception is power. And somewhere between London's gray skies and California's golden sunsets, a marriage stood under pressure not from proof, but from possibility. Because sometimes the most destructive force isn't evidence that it's doubt. The storm didn't explode. It lingered. And lingering storms are the most dangerous kind because they rot foundations quietly while everyone pretends the sky is clearing. In Montecito, the public narrative shifted back to calm philanthropy and curated appearances. Meghan reemerged with soft tones, controlled smiles, and carefully chosen words. But behind those composed gestures was something sharper, something watching, calculating, recalibrating. She understood better than anyone that survival in the modern arena isn't about innocence. It's about perception. And perception had been cracked. Harry, however, was unraveling in ways cameras couldn't capture. He had spent years positioning himself as the warrior against misinformation, the protector of his wife against a cruel press machine. But now the enemy wasn't a headline, it was uncertainty, a possibility whispered by his own father, a private meeting he wasn't invited to, a timeline that fit too neatly for comfort. That's what burrowed into him. Not proof, not evidence, alignment. He began revisiting memories, conversations from early in their relationship, stories Meghan had told about struggling auditions, about networking events in Europe, about interesting rooms she had once entered before Hollywood ever knew her name. At the time, he admired her resilience. Now, those same stories replayed in his mind like scenes with missing dialogue. He never confronted her directly, not at first. Instead, the tension lived in the space between them, in the way his hand hovered before resting on her back in public, in the way she spoke slightly longer than necessary when explaining trivial details, in the way silence lingered just half a second too long during dinner conversations. Silence is a language. And theirs had changed. Meanwhile, King Charles was not sitting idle in London. The correction about the yacht photograph had been welcomed publicly, but privately it irritated him because it had distracted the world from the real issue, not the image, but the implication. The alleged dinners, the alleged private tours, the alleged late-night drives in unmarked vehicles. The king wasn't interested in spectacle. He was interested in patterns. And patterns, once noticed, are difficult to unsee. He ordered his private team to examine travel records from the early 2000s. Discreetly, no paper trails that could leak, no staff chatter, just quiet verification of dates, guest lists, security logs, nothing official surfaced, no smoking gun. But there were gaps. Gaps are oxygen for suspicion. The reporter who ignited the scandal remained publicly defiant. He had lost credibility years ago, yes, but he knew something devastating. He didn't need proof to win. He needed plausibility, and plausibility had already done its work. Public interest slowly faded, not because questions were answered, but because the digital world moved on to fresher drama. Engagement metrics dipped, trending tags cooled, but reputations don't reset as fast as hashtags. In corporate boardrooms across America, executives quietly reconsidered association deals, not cancellations that would imply guilt, just delays, postponements, reevaluations, the language of cautious distancing. Harry felt it. Invitations that once arrived weekly now trickled in monthly. Meetings that used to feel enthusiastic now felt formal, guarded. He began spending longer hours alone. Extreme sports, private workouts, long drives along the Pacific coast. Physical speed as an escape from mental spirals. One evening, unable to carry the weight any longer, he finally asked her. Not angrily. Not accusingly. Just quietly. Is there anything I should know? The question didn't demand a timeline. It didn't reference Andrew. It didn't mention dinners or villas, but it carried everything that Meghan's response was measured. Calm. She reminded him of the debunked photograph, of the smear campaign, of the cruelty of attaching her name to a disgraced royal based on rumor alone. She spoke about ambition, about attending networking events in her 20s, about how proximity in powerful rooms doesn't equal intimacy, that her voice never wavered. And yet, something in Harry's chest didn't settle, because trust, once questioned, doesn't snap back into place. It stretches that back in London, Charles felt the emotional distance growing between his son and the crown, but for the first time, he didn't rush to bridge it. He had made a decision in that private manor meeting: if concrete evidence ever surfaced, sentiment would not shield anyone. The monarchy had survived wars, divorces, scandals. It would survive this too, but only by appearing ruthless when necessary. He stood one afternoon overlooking the palace gardens, winter branches bare against gray skies, and acknowledged a painful truth. In the digital age, innocence is not enough. You must appear untouchable. And the Sussex brand no longer looked untouchable. Weeks passed. The scandal officially cooled. Media panels moved on. Commentators found new targets. But the residue remained. Subtle, lingering. Meghan adjusted her strategy. Fewer spontaneous interviews, more scripted appearances, more emphasis on philanthropy, more visual storytelling about family unity. Controlled vulnerability replaced bold confrontation. To supporters, she looked dignified. To skeptics, she looked careful. But Harry smiled for cameras, but the defiance that once defined him had softened. He wasn't battling headlines anymore. He was battling the invisible erosion of certainty. And erosion is silent. That the most chilling part of the entire saga wasn't the photograph. It wasn't the reporter's claims. It wasn't even the secret meeting in London. It was this. Nothing was conclusively proven. Nothing was conclusively disproven. The truth existed in a gray zone. And gray zones are where narratives breed. Charles closed the final internal dossier months later. No verified link, no documented connection, no formal action required. Officially, the matter was over. Unofficially, the king knew better. Doubt had been planted in public memory. And public memory doesn't need accuracy. It needs repetition. Harry and Meghan continued forward. Projects launched, appearances made, smiles shared, but anyone watching closely could sense a recalibration, a more cautious choreography between them. Not broken, not exposed, but altered, or a chapter of history that simply hasn't finished unfolding. In the end, the monarchy didn't tremble because of evidence. It trembled because of doubt. And doubt, once awakened, never fully goes back to sleep.